Imagine, just for a second, a scenario that probably feels incredibly uncomfortable to even think about.
Oh, I can only imagine where we are going with this.
Right. So what if the people closest to you, I mean, the family you grew up with, evaluated your entire worth based purely on the car you drive and the clothes you wear?
Wow. Yeah, that is rough.
And what if, in their assessment of your supposedly unpolished life, they were just completely and spectacularly wrong?
It really forces us to confront a pretty unsettling reality about human nature. We all walk around operating under this assumption that the people who know us best can actually see past the surface.
Yeah, like we assume our inner circle judges us on our actual character.
Exactly. But the sources we are looking at today for this deep dive demonstrate just how fragile that assumption is. And honestly, sometimes it's entirely fabricated.
Well, our mission today is to unpack this really remarkable true narrative of a man named Ryan Carter and his 8-year-old son, Noah. We're going to explore how Ryan's quietest victory exposed the loudest flaws in the people around him.
It is such a fascinating look at the psychological intersections of wealth and
It
perception.
really is.
Uh,
Okay, let's unpack this because the inciting incident in this source material is objectively brutal. It's a cold Friday evening, and Ryan and Noah are essentially being evicted from a family property by Ryan's own brother and sister-in-law.
which really establishes the baseline for everything we are going to analyze today. We have to look at this not just as a narrative about some secret millionaire, but as a profound case study in cognitive biases.
Right. It's like a study of the devastating consequences when people unconsciously tie human value to visible financial status.
Exactly.
When I was going through the notes, my initial reaction was to compare this to that reality show Undercover Boss.
Oh, yeah, where the CEO puts on the fake mustache and everything.
Yeah, exactly, to see how the frontline workers behave. But doing this to your own family, that carries an entirely different level of emotional danger.
Oh, absolutely. You aren't just testing corporate compliance there. You are testing the fundamental, unconditional bonds of love and trust.
So to understand why the ultimate resolution of Ryan's story hits so hard, we first need to dissect the exact moment he was deemed a failure by his family.
Yeah, we really have to look at the mechanics behind their judgment.
So let's break down that scene. We're in the dining room of Ryan's childhood home. His older brother, David, his sister-in-law, Melissa, and a cousin slide this legal document across the table.
Just a completely cold transactional moment.
Totally. They are asking Ryan to sign away his claim to the family property and basically quietly forcing him out.
Yeah.
And their stated reasoning is that Ryan is a burden with, quote, no visible future.
And they base this entirely on what? The fact that he stays up late on his laptop and doesn't do a traditional morning commute to an office.
Right. It's wild.
But Ryan's reaction is what makes this such a fascinating behavioral study. Because he refuses to sign the document, but he doesn't argue. He doesn't beg.
He just takes his worn suitcase, grabs his son Noah's small backpack, and leaves.
Yeah. And the text provides a line that really anchors this entire dynamic. It says, the people who abandon you in your hardest season are often the same people who cannot understand your quietest victory.
Man, that line hits hard. But looking at the family's actions, I mean, how do a brother and sister-in-law get to a point where they can look at a widowed father and his 8-year-old son and deem them disposable?
Well, they fell victim to what psychologists call the representativeness heuristic. And they combine that with a pretty severe case of the horns effect.
Okay, wait, break that down for me. The representativeness heuristic.
Yeah, so basically the human brain is incredibly lazy. It constantly looks for shortcuts to process information quickly. When the family looked at Ryan, they didn't see Ryan the complex human being.
I just saw the surface stuff.
Right. They saw visual shortcuts, a faded high-mileage pickup truck, discount store clothing, the absence of a traditional 9-to-5 routine.
So they basically matched those visual cues to like a pre-existing archetype they had in their heads.
Precisely. They took those superficial markers and matched them to the archetype of a slacker or a failure.
And you mentioned the horns effect too.
Yeah, so the horns effect is basically the opposite of the halo effect. Because they perceived one negative trait, which in this case was his apparent lack of wealth, they allowed that perception to completely overshadow all of his positive traits.
Oh, wow. So they let an old truck, dictate their entire assessment of his character.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the reality of the situation. I mean, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, humans are wired to identify status because in tribal settings, status meant survival.
Right, so someone perceived as a burden was literally a threat to the tribe's resources.
Exactly. The family's reaction is just a really ugly modern manifestation of that primal sorting mechanism.
I hear the psychology behind it, but I have to push back on Ryan's behavior here. Because if we're talking about human nature, pride and ego are massively powerful forces.
Oh, definitely.
Like, if you are sitting at that dining room table and your own family is treating you and your child like a literal burden, human nature would compel almost anyone to pull out their phone, load up their banking app, and just shut the entire thing down.
It is incredibly tempting to do that, yeah.
Right. Like, why endure that level of humiliation when you have the ammunition to destroy their argument? Is there an element of, like, self-martyrdom here? Or maybe a manipulative test he is forcing them to fail?
I get why you'd think that. It's tempting to view his silence as a trap. But analyzing his deeper motivations reveals something much more disciplined, I think.
Really? How so?
Well, Ryan's choices in that dining room weren't about enduring humiliation for the sake of it. And they really weren't about testing his family either. They were about preserving his own internal data integrity.
Internal data integrity. That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, because think about it. If you introduce your bank account into an interpersonal conflict, you contaminate the variable. You no longer know if people are respecting you or if they are just respecting your capital.
Oh, man. That makes perfect sense. And that actually leads directly into the quiet hours after the eviction, where we really see his philosophy in action.
Yeah, the diner scene.
Exactly. So Ryan and Noah drive that old truck to a 24-hour diner. Noah is eating a grilled cheese and tomato soup. And the waitress assumes Ryan is completely broke, so she starts bringing him free coffee refills.
And he doesn't correct her at all.
No, he doesn't. He just accepts the gesture with genuine warmth.
Which shows a really stark contrast in sociological terms. We are looking at conditional versus unconditional empathy here.
Unconditional from the waitress, you mean?
Right. The waitress extended empathy based on perceived vulnerability. She saw someone struggling and just offered a small kindness.
While his family looked at that exact same perceived vulnerability and basically withdrew their empathy.
Exactly. They saw it only as a liability.
And the sources dig into how Ryan got to this mental state in the first place. Because 6 years before this night, Ryan lost his wife to a sudden illness.
Which is just a devastating detail.
Absolutely. A tragedy of that magnitude fundamentally rewires your brain. Your metrics for success completely shift. For Ryan, success stopped being about impressing people at family gatherings or displaying status markers.
Right. Success became the ability to have a slow breakfast with Noah, or just being present for bedtime stories.
Yeah. Losing a spouse forces a brutal prioritization of what actually matters. But the text also highlights a specific promise Ryan made to his late mother.
Oh yeah, this part is crucial.
He promised her that he would never allow wealth to become his identity. Her core lesson to him was to give people nothing to admire except your character.
And he really weaponized that advice in the best way possible, because later that night, they check into a cheap roadside motel.
Oh yeah, the kind of place with a lamp that literally buzzes when you turn it on.
Right. But while they are sitting in that dingy room, Ryan's phone starts vibrating off the nightstand. Because he is actually the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing cybersecurity company that designs emergency response systems for hospitals.
It's so crazy. While his family assumed his late nights on the laptop were spent aimlessly scrolling, he was building an absolute enterprise.
The juxtaposition is just wild.
It really is. Because the next morning, he wakes up in this cheap motel, puts on his one expensive navy blue suit, drives into downtown Dallas, walks into a 27th floor boardroom, and signs the final paperwork for a $30 million acquisition of his company.
$30 million. And then he just takes his kid for celebratory pancakes.
I love that detail. It feels like he built a psychological firewall. You know, in cybersecurity, a firewall keeps external malware from corrupting your internal network.
That is a great analogy.
Yeah, it's like Ryan built a firewall around his self-worth, keeping all those external judgments, both good and bad, completely out.
What's fascinating here is how effectively he operationalized that compartmentalization. In our modern culture, net worth and self-worth are dangerously intertwined. We use our job titles as our primary introduction.
Oh, constantly. It's usually the first thing people ask, what do you do?
Exactly. But Ryan actively resisted that. In the business world, he kept his name out of the press. He wanted his company's software to earn trust through sheer performance, not through the cult of personality of the founder.
He separated his intrinsic value from his extrinsic value so thoroughly that even his own family couldn't see the overlap.
But the airtight seal on that firewall is about to break. Because with the $30 million deal finalized, Ryan's private reality is now on an unavoidable collision course with the family who just kicked him to the curb.
Yep, which transitions us from the psychology of assumptions into the sociology of guilt and exposure.
The fallout is pretty spectacular.
So Ryan and Noah drive to an exclusive Dallas neighborhood. They move into this stone mansion with a lake, flower gardens, and this incredibly specific detail, a blue room with a telescope that Ryan planned specifically for Noah.
Meanwhile, back at David and Melissa's house, the narrative they built completely collapses.
Totally collapses. David is scrolling the news and sees a business article. It says, local cybersecurity firm finalizes landmark acquisition. It outlines the $30 million deal and features a photo of Ryan in that Navy suit.
The cognitive dissonance in that moment would be staggering.
Oh, I bet. Explain cognitive dissonance for the listeners real quick.
Sure. So cognitive dissonance is basically the mental discomfort experienced by someone who holds two contradictory beliefs at the same time.
Okay, so David's brain holds the belief that Ryan is a worthless burden.
Right. And then he is suddenly confronted with the undeniable fact that Ryan is a wildly successful multimillionaire. The brain has to reconcile that massive gap, and the process is usually incredibly painful.
And the internet makes sure they cannot look away from it. Because an SUV driver spots Ryan's beat-up old truck parked outside this massive new mansion.
Oh, yeah, the viral photo.
Yeah, they snap a photo and post it online with the caption, "Success does not always look the way people expect." It goes completely viral and makes its way straight into the Carter family group chat.
Of course it does.
Cousin Ethan texts the group and says, "We threw out a man who sold a company for more than $30 million this morning."
A brutal, unfiltered summary of their error right there.
And here's where it gets really interesting to me. Because I look at that group chat explosion, and I have to question the authenticity of their sudden panic.
You think it wasn't genuine remorse?
Are they actually experiencing remorse for treating a family member like garbage? Or is this just the ultimate manifestation of FOMO, fear of missing out?
That's a fair question.
Like, are they just reeling from the shock that they alienated a newly minted multi-millionaire who could have bought them boats and paid off their mortgages?
Differentiating between mourning a relationship and mourning proximity to wealth is crucial here. But the source material provides a mechanism that shifts the family's reaction from mere financial FOMO to a genuine moral crisis, I think.
Okay, what is it?
Back at the house, Melissa is cleaning up and finds Noah's forgotten coloring book. She flips it open and finds a drawing titled, My Family. Yeah, and it features Ryan, Noah, David, and Melissa all drawn together beneath a big yellow sun.
That is heavy.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that drawing is the catalyst that breaks their cognitive dissonance. A child's drawing represents unconditional love and intrinsic inclusion.
Right. It operates on a completely different frequency than the adult's transactional status-driven acceptance.
Exactly. When Melissa sees that drawing, she isn't thinking about a missed opportunity for a handout. That is the exact moment the true weight of their moral failure sets in.
They realize they didn't just miscalculate a bank balance. They discarded a child who viewed them as a safe harbor.
And that realization forces a confrontation. The digital revelation isn't enough. The guilt actually drives them to physically seek Ryan out.
So they arrive at the gates of the new mansion. David, Melissa, the cousins, they all show up. And Ryan, relying on his mother's advice that dignity should never become bitterness, actually lets them in.
Which is incredibly gracious. But their expectations walking through those doors are very telling.
How so?
Well, they are bracing themselves for the architecture of revenge, basically.
Oh, I see. They are totally expecting gold statues, flashy cars, and abstract art meant to intimidate them.
Right. Instead, they walk in and find well-worn novels, a piano, and an environment that just feels like a lived-in home. There's no expensive artwork designed to broadcast wealth.
Because Ryan's physical environment is a direct reflection of his internal values.
Exactly. By not presenting them with a flashy display of wealth, he completely disarms their defenses. They came prepared to face this arrogant, wealthy man they could resent.
But they are forced to stand in front of the exact same humble brother they threw away.
It leaves them absolutely no place to hide their guilt.
So David breaks the silence and admits he thought Ryan was struggling. Melissa finally asks, "Why didn't you tell us?" And Ryan delivers the core lesson of this entire deep dive.
This part is so
He
powerful.
holds a photo of his late mother and says, "Never let money introduce you before your character does. If people respect you only after discovering your bank account, they never respected you at all."
He completely bypasses the financial conversation entirely and aims straight for the philosophical truth.
And he adds the most devastating part. He tells them the hardest part of the eviction wasn't that they thought he was poor.
Right.
The hardest part was that because they thought he was poor, they believe he and Noah deserved a little less kindness.
Man, this raises such an important question about the anatomy of true accountability. Ryan isn't asking for an apology for a misunderstanding here.
No, he's identifying a profound moral injury.
Exactly. He is forcing them to acknowledge that their capacity for kindness was entirely conditional on perceived utility. They didn't treat him poorly because he was a bad person.
They treated him poorly because they thought he lacked capital.
Right.
So what does this all mean for the future of this family? Like, how do you even begin to rebuild a relationship when the foundational truth on the table is that your love had a price tag?
Well, rebuilding requires a complete dismantling of ego. David has to admit that his actions weren't about protecting the family from a burden. They were about protecting his own sense of superiority.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
Extremely tough. In sociology, restoring trust after a moral breach of this magnitude requires moving completely away from transactional behaviors. You cannot buy your way back in, and you certainly can't talk your way back in.
You have to demonstrate a fundamental change in how you assign value to others.
Yes, over a long period of time.
And while the adults are tangled up in this heavy, complex reality of fractured egos, the ultimate resolution cuts through all of it, coming from the 8-year-old.
Children always have a way of doing that.
They really do. So Noah comes running downstairs. He's found the perfect spot for his mother's photo on a shelf. David, who is just completely broken at this point, apologizes to Noah.
And Noah's response is amazing.
And Noah simply looks at him and says, "You can still come visit."
It is the ultimate foil to the adult's behavior. Children, before they are socialized to recognize status hierarchies, do not measure human worth by extrinsic markers.
That makes total sense.
Noah's immediate offering of grace demonstrates that while the adults complicated their relationships with judgment and calculation, the child operated purely on intrinsic connection.
It's beautiful, really. And later that evening, after the family leaves, Ryan and Noah are sitting on the dock behind the house. Noah asks, "Are we rich now?"
And Ryan's answer is just perfect.
He answers with what basically feels like the thesis of his life. He says, "Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy kindness. If we ever forget that, then we will become poor no matter how much we have."
It really solidifies the difference between being wealthy and being rich in character.
And the aftermath of the story proves it wasn't just a nice speech. Ryan quietly establishes a scholarship for single parents in his mother's name.
He doesn't upgrade to a sports car either, right?
No, he keeps driving that faded old pickup truck until the engine literally dies. And as for the family, they do slowly rebuild trust. Not through dramatic apologies, but through consistent, quiet humility over a long period of time.
They essentially have to earn their way back into his life using the exact same currency Ryan uses, which is character.
It makes you realize that diving into this source material isn't just about enjoying a story where the underdog wins.
No, it's much more than that.
It acts as a mirror, forcing you to look at the shortcuts your own brain takes when evaluating the people around you. At the top of the show, I asked you to imagine being judged entirely by your clothes or your car.
And Ryan's quietest victory completely dismantled the flawed logic behind that kind of judgment.
It really is a mirror we all need to look into occasionally.
Absolutely. And to build on Ryan's philosophy of intrinsic versus extrinsic value, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
All right, let's hear it.
If every outward marker of your success, your job title, the balance in your investment accounts, the neighborhood you live in, were suddenly erased tomorrow, who in your life would still offer you a seat at their table?
Wow.
And perhaps more uncomfortably, if we are being truly honest with ourselves, who would you still offer a seat to?